I finally finished the rest of the Breach series by KI Lynn, so that means it's time for yet another YouTube series wrap-up. When I started the second book, Infraction, I was honestly kind of expecting that Delilah and Nathan would have their quickly kiss and make up so that we can get back to the good stuff. You know, because 50 Shades did it, and so do a lot of other series. They'll break up at the end of book one only for them to quickly brush the actual problems under the rug and ignore all of it in favor of getting back to the good stuff. However, I was kind of surprised when the book opened immediately following the car accident the first book ended on. Delilah wasn't magically healed and she didn't instantly forgive Nate. But, and that's a really big but, me being impressed at the book forsaking Delilah's guns quickly ends at this point. For you see, Nate had gone to the scene of the accident, and when he saw how damaged and broken Lila was, he had a mental breakdown and also needed to be hospitalized. So when Delilah wakes up, it's only to find Nate screaming at her and trying to tell her that he loves her, that he can't imagine being without her by his side, etc., etc. Back to me being impressed, and Delilah pointedly tells him that if she means that much to him, then he wouldn't have raped her and then dumped her. Granted, the narration never once addresses the rape for what it is, but it still brings up that when you love somebody, you don't go out of your way to intentionally hurt them, not in the way Nate hurt Lila. And then this is where I lost all and any respect for the story. Lila basically told Nate where he can stick it, that she never wanted to see him again, which is fair, and I don't think anybody would disagree with me about that. But rather than the few friends Lila has visiting her and promising to take care of her, instead, it's only Nate's parents and his cousin that he's really close to. What are their names, you want to know? The heck if I know. I literally finished the fourth book a couple hours ago, and I couldn't be pressed to tell you what their names were. Anyway, so they all keep coming into Lila's hospital room and they literally pressure her into getting back together with a man who struck so much psychological damage into her. I'm positive that there are a bunch of super sick people who think that this kind of thing is romantic or something. Obviously, I don't. I don't think it's romantic to have the mother of the man who raped you come into your hospital room when you're at your most vulnerable and tell you that you should give the man who raped you a second chance. Even after Lila gets out from the hospital, they continue to ignore all of her wishes and push themselves onto her simply so that they can emotionally wear her down until she finally relents and agrees to be with Nate again. The singular consolation in all of this is that at least it's Nate's female cousin and his mother who are largely taking care of her, if only for personal things like helping her use the toilet and shower. Following this, Lila obviously goes into therapy. She does have a therapist who was seen briefly right after her non-responsive psychological breakdown when Nate dumped her, but the entire incident was kind of like this entire, okay, so you had a breakdown, but because our state's mental health facilities are majorly underfunded, we have like 10 beds, and you need to leave. Now, his character was such a non-character, and I'm not sure if he could even count as having been in the first book. Anyway, Darren insists on seeing not only Lila, but also Nate. Not individually, but as a couple. Have I mentioned that Nate and Darren are also cousins-in-law? That's right. Rather than actually looking out for the patient's best interest, it's obvious from the introduction of this character that literally the only thing Darren is siding with is every other terrible character in this book. He's pressuring Lila to hook up back up with the man who raped her. There's even a moment when Lila randomly thinks that Darren is psychologically manipulating her. I saw that line and latched onto it fast in the hopes that things would get better in the book after Lila acknowledged this. I was wrong, and not even Lila brought that point back up again, so it kind of makes me wonder what the point even was. I'm not saying that couples who are having a bit of a rough patch shouldn't try therapy before doing something more drastic like getting a divorce. All I'm saying is that there's a line that needs to be drawn of acceptable behavior versus completely non-redeemable. I hope I don't have to explain to somebody that literally raping your romantic partner falls under the latter category. And yes, it's good that Nate is finding ways to express his anger rather than to constantly put his fist through the wall or throw things. Yes, it's good that Lila is working on her trust and intimacy issues, but it's bad that the only person in this book who is against the idea of them getting back together is Lila. As I keep saying, her opinion didn't matter to anybody else in the book. They only saw how better Nate was when he was with her, despite the fact that he was angry and jealous and did horrible, terrible things to her. And apparently nobody saw how miserable that Nate was making Lila, about how she was smoking and drinking. So this self-improvement is fine if it's the guy doing the self-improvement, but if it's at the cost of the woman's mental health, then who cares? That's literally the only thing I'm getting from this. As you can imagine, they all wear Lila down until she and Nate start to work on getting their bedroom trust back because, wow, it's almost like after being brutally raped, you kind of don't trust that person anymore. Funny how that works. While they're working on their inner reflections, we must finally address the elephant in the room. What happened to Nate to make him so broken? We already know more or less about what happened to Delilah, about how her father and stepbrother routinely brutalized her until she finally begged for help and managed to get out of the situation. But what about Nate? To make a long story short, when he was a prosecutor, Nate decided to poke the hornet's nest of the local mafia. If you've seen literally any sort of legal drama before, you probably know where this is going. The mafia didn't like that and ran him and his wife off of the road. Nate somehow survived, but only barely. His pregnant wife didn't make it out from the scene of the crash. What's worse is that everybody looked at a car being sideswiped and randomly said, "Obviously Nate was a little tipsy. It's a tragic accident, but what do you want us to do?" Which kind of makes me think that there were some dirty cops, but again, this never really went anywhere, so whatever, I don't care. But Nate had been holding on to the grief of his dead wife and unborn child for about 4 years now, which is a long time to wallow in that much grief. I get that it's not easy to lose your wife, but at the same time, at a certain point you need to stop letting grief rule you and start living again. Anyway, at one point Nate has a nightmare, wakes up randomly, and decides that he's suddenly gotten over Grace's death, which I'm glad that you finally reached that point after some intense therapy and actually finding somebody to be happy with. But at the same time, the entire thing feels like the author got bored without having the two of them constantly want to do fun stuff or doing fun stuff, so she decided that they were cured now and no longer need to be in therapy. Like, literally not at all. The book doesn't get points for actually including psychology, but then doing it in the worst way possible. This is my entire argument when people say, well, I'd rather have a book about really toxic gays than no gays at all. I'd rather that psychology never be brought up than to have people think that this is how it works. That you'll go to therapy twice weekly for 2 months and then like a switch, you'll be cured and you'll never need another session for the rest of your life. And then there was still some book left, so the author decided to add in a bit more of Lila's drama. Her stepbrother Adam showed up at her door, pushed his way in, and tried to rape and murder her. You know, fun stuff. When he was doing it, he kept blaming her over and over for provoking him into wanting to murder her, as you do. Anyway, Nate showed up and pulled Adam off, where he was promptly arrested. When Delilah got back to the office following that, the members of Team I Never Emotionally Matured Past High School started in on how Delilah was taking an awful lot of personal time away from work. Delilah takes off her scarf to show them the pretty necklace Adam had given her by way of a handprint-shaped bruise, if you don't catch my meaning. Meanwhile, Jack had decided that he created the no workplace fraternization rule a long time ago, and that it's time to do away with it. At the same time he announces that he's going to get rid of it, Nate turns to Delilah in front of the entire office and drops to one knee while pulling out a ring box. The third book sees the two of them married. The entire thing seems so painfully rushed, especially considering that not even a couple of months earlier, Lila was screaming at him that she never wanted to see him again, but the author is over it and it randomly expects for the readers to be over it too. One of the nicest scenes in the book is after Jack got back from the destination wedding and he finally confronted one of the members of Team I Never Emotionally Matured Past High School and called her out for offering certain kinds of favors in exchange for work favoritism from one of the owner lawyers. So both of them got fired of that, which really put the other two members of that team down. Anyway, after all the wedding stuff, there's Adam's trial. This went on for a long time, and normally I'm down for legal dramas. You know me, huge fan of Law & Order and Criminal Minds, but I feel like even I was a little disappointed with how long that it dragged on for. Over the course of the trial, Delilah confessed that it wasn't simply her father beating her and grooming the brother to take his aggression out on Lila. It was doctors systematically ignoring all and any warning signs and believing the "my daughter is clumsy" lie his daddy came up with. It was the teachers also ignoring everything. It was the principal literally being BFFs with daddy and trying to cover up the abuse. She talks about how she contacted the family lawyer when she was 16 because she'd reached her breaking point, about how the lawyer showed up at the school, took one look at Lila, and immediately pulled the poor girl out from the home. Adam naturally talked about how the entire thing ruined his life, about how he had to go to juvie and how he couldn't get into college. His ex-girlfriend says a completely different story, although I'm positive that you know how her story goes. In court, Adam literally couldn't keep his mouth shut no matter what was going on. He made derogatory outbursts upon finding out Layla had gotten married. He made outbursts when she was giving testimony. I hope I don't have to tell you that the man accused of trying to rape and murder his stepsister, calling said sister a four-letter SL word in front of the judge and jury, doesn't look good. Thankfully, the judge threw the book at him, said that it was clear that the man didn't know the meaning of the word remorse. The only downside is that nobody looked into the system of abuse that kept Lila a literal prisoner for more than a decade, but that almost seemed like a side note to all of that. And finally, we have to wrap up the Mafia subplot, which wasn't so much of a side plot so much as a tiny one-sentence footnote in the grand scheme of the series, but we're doing it, so okay. To make a long subplot short, one of Nate's old police buddies calls him up one day and says that they're reopening the case and asks for Nate's old files. Nate tells them to stop kicking that particular hornet's nest. The cop refuses. The Mafia now thinks that Nate is back on the case again and starts aiming for him and his new wife. Meanwhile, Nate runs around and tries to help build up the case by offering up the evidence that he had during the first failed trial so that the current legal team on the case can do it all over again, but he intentionally goes out of his way to hide all of this from Delilah. I'd also like to add that after Nate's wife was murdered, Nate never tried to go into witness protection. He also only moved apartments, but got it under the name of his parents, which is Thorne. It wouldn't take too much to dig up that info and find his new address. It was like he wanted for them to hunt him down and finish the job or something. But the problem with Nate's plan is that Layla isn't stupid. She knows what's going on, and it doesn't help that her foster brother is also a cop who was able to loop her in. Yet despite knowing that a literal mob boss was trying to murder her husband, Layla never once said, "Alright, I'm out, bye." At one point, the narration even admitted that Lila was walking on eggshells around Nate. Yes, it literally used the word eggshells. However, by the time that it reached this point, it was really hard for me to give a flying fig about any of it. Why? Because Delilah intentionally ignored all and any warning signs, including in regards to the Italian Mafia. I don't have any sympathy for people like her who acknowledge that they're in a terrible situation but refuse to do anything about it. The book ends with this really dumb showdown in a random barn with the head of the Mafia threatening to kill Nate in front of Delilah. The police show up and randomly kill the Mafia boss, and Nate declares that the entire thing is over now, completely and utterly ignoring all the other mobsters who were there to back up their boss. But you know what? It was the end of the series, so I kinda don't care. But you're saying, wait, there's only 3 books, and there's 4 books in the series. Yes, I hope that you like the first book, because that's literally what the 4th book was. The first book from Nate's point of view. Since it was nothing more than rehashing everything, but with his opinions on things, I'm not gonna take long to tell you about it. The entire thing felt like reheated leftovers, but the leftovers had already gone bad, but your mom still wanted you to eat it anyway. Do you guys like Gollum from Lord of the Rings? Because if you do, then you're in for a treat, since that's what half of Nate's personality was in this. He had constant back and forth arguments with himself. And I get that this was before all of the healing and everything, but shoot, nobody really asked for a peek inside of his mind, and having read it, it didn't make the first book better, but somehow made the abuse Delilah suffered at Nate's hands somehow worse in hindsight. When you read the first book, you're like, this is abusive, but knowing why Nate was acting like that made it 10 times worse. Like, sorry that your wife is dead, but that's no reason to sexually abuse a woman that you met a few weeks ago. And yeah, that was the Breach trilogy with bonus book nobody wanted. Yet another pull to publish Twilight fanfic of a man with a difficult background he was emotionally unable to move past, using his background to justify the way he abused a woman, and the woman who had an equally difficult background with the narration justified in making sure that she was docile and stayed no matter what. It was infuriating while I read it, but now that I'm finished, I have a feeling that I will struggle to remember any of it in a month.